Let's get started, because honestly, I think it's just a really great segue from the Leading Through Uncertainty panel. I hadn't seen any of the discussion topics ahead of time, and as they're talking, I was just like, this is really great to tie into this last session of Leads. So I'm imagining that there's a whole bunch of people, you know, heads are swimming, these ideas, lists of things, next actions. And just one thing to keep in mind is that although it's easier to have all these ideas floating around in your mind and thinking about all the things, you can't do all the things you think. So hopefully this session will just help to narrow things down, summarize, help you to kind of get a clear plan to move forward with all the stuff that you've seen this week. You're probably going to find like how self-acceptance and knowing about defenses and communication and collaboration and uncertainty and that shared vision, how it kind of, you'll notice how it's woven into just some basic fundamentals of healthy teams. And I'm expecting you'll probably pull from all those sessions to determine how you'll support healthy teams moving forward. So this afternoon was really spent time thinking about, what does a healthy team mean? So welcome to the Healthy Team Check-in. I see we've got a combination of team leads and some team members, which let's call them co-leaders. So this is great. This is going to be fun. Let's get started. Goals. I like goals. By the end of this session, the goals are that you'll walk away with a vision, like some image in your mind, a little clearer of like what team health looks like for your team. You'll have an idea of like, what can I actually do to assess it, to gauge the overall team health? And then actions for improvement, some next steps. And whether you're leading a team or you're a team member, there's things that you can do to support improvement moving forward. And there's always things to improve on, right? We heard about some of that in the session this morning. There's always ways to unlock more potential for team members so that they can turn more of their energy into more amazing things. So if you notice some of those defensive responses that we learned about on Wednesday's session, if you notice some of those turning up, just lean into it. Maybe make a note. When Tracy said this, I got defensive, because there's probably something important there. So just pay attention to that. Sound good? Yeah? All right, let's get started. First and foremost, what's a healthy team? Keeping it really simple, it's a group of people that just want to work together, they like working together, and they consistently deliver on their goals. When I think about a group of people that want to work together and who consistently deliver on their goals, I think of the history of the delivery team, or specifically the team that has worked with cricket during those first years. In 2014, AO, now known as cricket, they were set to go online, and leading that charge was someone that you might know, named Nick Palazzo, and you might also be familiar with the name Lindsay Lane. So they were responsible for bringing AO online, and the pressure was intense. If any of you worked with the AO group during that time, you know what I mean when I say the pressure was intense. It was very, very demanding, sometimes fair, but always demanding. But they had this way, this group had this rhythm, this way of being that helped them through it. And Lindsay had the way of holding space so that she was somehow protecting the team enough from the pressure that they could perform, but still holding the expectations there that they had to achieve. And the team was having fun. I don't know if you can ask the team about the board of Lindsayisms that they kept. Lindsay's known for sometimes words come out faster than they're strung together coherently, and they end up not making a lot of sense, and they're sometimes kind of funny in the way that they're received. So the team actually started to capture them and put them in a place that they could bring them up later, and they would pull them up and just have fun with it. It was kind of a running joke. So with all this pressure, all this demand coming on, they're still having fun. This was a team of individuals who was constantly challenged, and they delivered, and they really enjoyed working with each other. Watching the magic of this team kind of made me want to be a part of it. You know, when you see the cool kids in the playground and you're like, I want to be there. It was that type of team environment. Lindsay just has this way of stewarding a team. She pays attention to the overall team culture, the climate of the team. And she just works with everyone to make sure that they have what they need to be successful together. And it's not that the work wasn't hard, because it really, really was, but it was also really rewarding. So that's a group of people that I would say, in my opinion, want to work together and they consistently deliver on their goals. Well, that sounds lovely, Tracy. So what makes a healthy team? It's when team members are coming to work and there's this energy exchange that's transforming into results, right? People are energy. You add more people together, there's more energy. You add more team, they become a team. When teams come together, they're a company of energy. And when teams are really working, there's not those resistance or those friction points, right? The energy continues to grow and build. There's not those like stop, stuck points. That's really what we're talking about here. So what you would have experienced in 2014 is that AO team was getting the final bugs out, getting ready to deploy, was a team that wasn't afraid to ask questions. They weren't afraid to raise concerns, to bring things up. There was so much trust and respect. And we heard about that in the session earlier about trust and being able to raise concerns. And there's just so much trust and respect that when someone asked a question, it wasn't taken as a sign of doubt, right? It wasn't taken personally of like, oh, like as if I didn't think of that. Everyone understood that a question was asked to make sure that they all got to succeed together. So they felt safe and they could depend on each other. And part of that dependability meant that they held each other accountable. They knew that they were going to call each other out. They could depend on each other. And they'd call themselves out within their team, you know, with their expectations with clients. You could trust that they were going to call each other out and be accountable. So they knew they could depend on each other. They knew how to operate and what was expected. So there was structure and clarity. And they knew what impact and what their work meant to the company as a whole. Getting Cricket, known as AO then, was part of one of the major strategic initiatives. So it was really clear, like, why are we here? What are we trying to do? What impact does our work have? So if you caught all that, you would see team members trusting each other. You would see them engaged in unfiltered conflict around ideas. I'm sure there's a few people in this room that have been in conflict with Lindsay. I have, I'm gonna talk about it. They commit to decisions and plans of action. They hold one another accountable for delivering against the plans, right? So they're gonna call it out, like, you said you're going to, you've got to deliver. And they focus on the achievement of the collective results. So I'm sure like, oh, that all looks great. It's really easy to nod your head at that. But I just want to leave these words on the page in front of you and just let it settle for a bit. It's not anything new or extraordinary, right? It's not like, oh, well, I never thought of that. Our team should have that. But as you read them, just let your mind explore how these words fit with your team, how these words fit with your team of teams. And that's one area we can sometimes forget about is like, as your teams are interacting with other teams, how do these play in? And then if anything comes up for you as you consider these topics of trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, results, just start to note it down. I want to spend a hot minute on psychological safety. This was covered a lot in the last session, and I just wanted to like say it's psychological safety. That's what we're talking about. But I thought it would be a little prompting. Psychological safety is one of the top predictors of team health, team performance. And just thank you, Wikipedia. It's about being able to safely show up as your whole self without being afraid of negative consequences. So interpersonal consequences. That's what psychological safety is about. That's what we're talking about here. So when people don't feel safe to ask a question that they really want to ask, so they're sitting there in a meeting, there's a question that they want to ask, but they just don't feel safe to do it, or they have an idea, that's the idea that would have like taken the product into a whole new direction. It's sitting there in that room and it didn't come up. This is when teams are missing out, right? They're missing out on insights, no one gains, problems go unreported, opportunities to get better, they're missed. So mistakes get repeated. And sometimes there's like some serious mistakes that after the team member, Trish was just saying this, after someone will say like, oh yeah, I knew that wouldn't work. You're like, if only. This is what psychological safety is about. And you can ask how many times a Tyler or an Alex asked the question of Lindsay with no fear of consequence, or a Delroy spoke up to make sure that the team wasn't missing anything, right? This team speaks up because they all want to be successful together and they're not afraid of the consequences, those interpersonal consequences. And that safety comes from modeling the way, something that Lindsay has always done. In prepping for this, I dug up a message that Lindsay sent me when we were working on this project. I had some involvement in the project at the time. And she sent me this message after we'd been in a conversation, a client was there, and it was just like this really strange conversation we got stuck in and we didn't know how to move it forward in a unified approach. So it was really fumbly. It's just a little thing, right? It's just, okay, well, the conversation didn't go smoothly, but the client didn't really feel it as much, but Lindsay and I both felt it. Lindsay sends me this message saying, I just want to figure out where my fault is in that, right? Like she sends me a message because she wants to follow up. She noticed a stickiness where energy wasn't moving and she wanted to figure out like, what could she do to remove it? When teams have this high degree of psychological safety, they get what's called learning behavior, right? And what that means is continuously getting better, right? Continuously getting more results. And I won't go too far into it, but there's so much research on psychological safety and innovation, psychological safety and team performance, psychological safety on overall company performance. And these are just these little events that have such a big effect. Because when Lindsay sent me this message, like just a little thing, what it did to me was signal that it was a safe place for me to explore my role in it too, right? So I'm like, oh, she's exploring, that's really cool. I wonder, I should check in, like, what did I do that caused that too? All it takes is just this little bit of vulnerability to give your team permission to feel safe, to be heard, feel safe to fail. And we're going to talk about it a lot. But what does this mean? This could be a whole session in itself, and probably one day it will be, as I think about that. Probably one day will. But if you take nothing from today's Healthy Team Check-in, I want to spend time exploring psychological safety because it is so nuanced. Clayton has come back to me in a few conversations where he's just like, I wonder if that comment eroded some of the psychological safety between you and that team. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, I should probably reach out and just check in that they didn't take that wrong, that my tone was harsher than it needed to be, or my facial expression came up in a way that would erode that safety. So what we're going to do a first breakout here into groups of 4 or 5. And there's a section in your workbook on page 26. And this is something you're going to answer by yourselves as you're going through. But I want you in groups so that if something comes up, you have an opportunity to kind of share and ask questions. Because sometimes as you're going through something, it's like, oh, actually, I don't really know. And then you just have a space to kind of chat about it. So we'll take about 8 minutes to go through the questions. And this is where I'm like watching the breakout numbers, like, don't run away. You can leave your cameras off. You can leave them off. But if you are invested in digging into this, just hang out and try it. I know that breakouts can be scary. All right. I say page 26. Oh, yes, page 26. Thank you, Joanne. Page 26, you're going to find some questions. So let's hop out into some breakouts. We'll take about 8 minutes. And just again, like, watch for signs of defensiveness. Come back to acceptance of just like, oh, yeah, I could do that better, or that's a thing. All right. We ready, Erin? Awesome. Have fun. Let's chat a little bit about how that went, what we uncovered. Any questions there kind of like get you annoyed? Any questions or like, I don't want to answer that? No? Good.
The scary thing for me was how easy it was to answer things I can do better, not necessarily what's worked on the past.
Some of that's also because we're kind of hard on ourselves. So if you're prompted a little harder, you could probably come up with some things that have worked too. But things I can do better is like a great starting point, right? It's like, oh, well, that's improvement forward. Things you're already doing good. It's like, oh, where's the next thing? Anything else come up as you're doing those questions?
I mean, our group talked the whole time, so we did not do it on our own. So I am sorry, and we got through one question, but it was really insightful because I think we all heard from each other and what has worked, and we were talking a little bit about like toxic positivity and like what does it look like to create this space versus always just trying to find a solution or the bright side. And it was a really great discussion.
Thank you for sharing.
I thought it was an extremely valuable breakout, just the conversation. My fields are all blank. I didn't actually write anything down. And I don't want to tell on anybody, but some people dominated the conversation. Okay, I'll tell. It was me.
I knew it was when you said that, Nevin. I knew. Anything else come up as you're talking and exploring psychological safety? Was there anything that was like, oh, actually there's like this little thing that if I change, that might make a difference?
This doesn't entirely answer your question, but when I was going through it, I found myself thinking, this is my perspective on the answer, but it'd be interesting to survey my team on this, of how I do on this, because I think I have one view of it, but others probably have a very different view, positive or negative, I don't know. But, and then the other thing that I found was me asking my partner management team versus me wearing my SLG hat and asking the whole company would also be a very interesting question. Because I think what I found as I was writing is and I don't know if any of my partner crew is on here, but I have a very different working relationship with the partner team just because we've been together for so many years. So from a trust and a humility perspective, we just know each other more than I do with other people at the company. So I think when I think about how have things worked, it was interesting to reflect that way.
Thank you for sharing. That's yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have a share?
Well, Joanne mentioned hats. Where do we get our hats?
Don't you see my pretty hat that I have on? I'm such a nerd. I always put my little hat on. Sorry, Tracy.
No, one thing that can, and because this is the last session, I want to make sure there's like exchange and we're talking, because one thing that we sometimes forget is like, as leads, as co-leads, we're all trying our very best and everyone's trying. And so when we're talking to each other and we're sharing what we're observing and what we're going through and what's working and what's not working, we get to build our own collective intelligence and get better together. So having those conversations, whether it's just like, how do you do this? Or like, oh, you're gonna take it to your team. Did that work? How did, following up later, did you take it to your team? Did that work? How'd you do it? But what we're talking about with psychological safety is really getting into those nuances, right? Those like looking for opportunities to remind people that this is a safe space, watching to make sure that you're holding a safe space. I was facilitating a strategic meeting the other day and someone raised a tension and the whole team didn't sense the same tension. So one person brings up a tension, no one else felt it. But through the process in their practice, they explore it together because the tension holder gets to get resolved. It doesn't matter if everyone else feels it. And it just led to a really good discussion that was really useful to bring everyone together because one person just felt different and they talk about it and then they come together at the end. Christopher was in that meeting and he called a pause and he just acknowledged what just happened. That like this person brought up attention, and even though it wasn't shared by everyone, everyone left space for it to be explored and how important that is for people to feel safe the next time, to feel safe with the next tension, right? Just this little tiny thing. And then me as a facilitator, I'm like, shit, that was my job to catch that and call it out. Like, damn, I missed. So then I have like, oh, there's an opportunity for me to get better, to like watch for those nuances that happen. So I filed that away in my things I can do better file, like watch for those moments to celebrate when people are leaving space, because we'll do it more often. Always learning, never perfect, but always paying attention, right? So it's just those really subtle things that signal safety or lack of. One thing, like, so on the other side of that, it can inadvertently signal a lack of safety if someone has a comment. Consider like the survey as an example. If you're a team that reviews survey comments one by one, and you come back with like, well, that's not a thing. There's someone in that room that has that experience that just feels like, like their thoughts don't matter or aren't important or aren't valid. Like that little thing, it's like, you don't mean harm by it. It's like, oh, well, I don't feel that way. It's like, oh, well, that's curious. I wonder why that experience is happening for someone. that little nuance. Another nuance is facial expressions. When the first thing that a baby can recognize is disgust on a face. Our ability to recognize that micro expression is like programmed for survival. And so if your face comes up with any sort of micro expression of disgust, people catch that in their subconscious and they retreat internally, whether they know it or not. Like my 15-year-old is just waiting for me to show any sign of disapproval so she can remind me that I don't support her, and she's just waiting to get into a fight at any moment. And so I don't have a poker face. I don't know if you've been around me, I don't have a poker face. If you watch like candid pictures of me, I'm always like, oh, like it's just not a poker face. And so I'm working really hard at trying to stay like soft and open and curious when she's telling me something, because she's so ready to be like, you don't support me, see? And it's like, oh, micro expression, damn it. Those little tiny things erode psychological safety bit by bit. And this is what we're talking about, just creating an environment where people aren't afraid of the interpersonal consequences of speaking up, right? Is this making sense? Does it feel a little hard? It's interesting. People are interesting. Okay, but it seems, like all those words look really nice, but what actually gets in the way? We know what team health is, or at least what it should feel like. What gets in the way? What happens? I'm trying to keep it really simple, and I think it captures a lot of it. It's a lack of clarity and a lack of openness and honesty. Clarity in why the team exists, in their connection and to purpose. So what binds people together is a shared identity or purpose, the reason the team exists, right? What are we here to actually do? Why do we matter? A custodian comes to work every day for an office building, and he took the job because he was desperate for a job. It wasn't like he wasn't passionate about custodial work, but he needed a job. And he would show up uninterestingly, grab his cart and work through the checklist, just kind of ending each day without really paying much attention to what he did, not really thinking much about it. He did his work, he completed the checklist. The office building manager, he noticed his lack of interest in the job, and he called him in for an office tour, and he said, Greg, do you know why we have someone like you on our team? Of course, Greg wasn't really sure where this conversation was headed, so he replied, to have someone who picks up the garbage off the floor? No, Greg. And the building manager answered, and he pressed the elevator button as they came down to the main floor and into the big lobby. Every day, over 600 people come into this building. They left their homes, they left their families to come into this place. Some of those people walk in these doors, and he points to the elevator, goes up that elevator and goes into an office that's gray and uninspiring. The one thing that we can do as the people that manage this building is make it a place that people feel proud to walk into. Make it a little easier to leave their comfortable homes, and they might even get energy from their experience when they're walking through these hallways that you look after. Without you here, we couldn't do that for them. Every day, as you're working through your checklist, just think about those people who left their homes this morning and are coming through your hallways, and think about the pride they feel for this beautiful and clean building that they walk into. Think about the impact that your work has on their day. Of course, the next day, Greg comes in and his checklist had so much more meaning, and he's starting to notice fingerprints where he hadn't noticed them before, and he's pretty proud of getting rid of them. And he's thinking about the individuals who come in and out of that building. And that's just a simple story about purpose, right? When your meaning makes sense and you know what impact you're having, you put more energy and effort into it. And people don't have to tell you, make sure you get all the fingerprints, because the work matters and they'll figure out how to do it themselves. So when the clarity isn't there, when that connection and clarity isn't there, people they can feel disengaged and uninspired. So be thinking about, is your team's purpose, their mission, is it clear? Does it resonate with the team? Like, why are we here? What impact do we have? What value do we bring to our clients, to our company? You can use page 27 to make notes on things as we're talking through some of these. And maybe you have a question you want to bring back to your team to just say, like, actually, I don't know. I don't know if they're really connected. I don't know if they feel that inspired. And it's okay if they don't, right? You can bring the question back and then do better. Some teams' health is affected because it's not clear what success looks like. Team members feel like they're on a hamster wheel with no clear goals on what they're actually aiming for. Like, how do we know we're winning? So consider if your goals in your strategic plan are clear. Does the team know what success looks like? Do they know when they reach a goal? Many times, health is affected by a lack of clarity around who does what around here, right? Especially in a peer-based network where it can be a little tricky. Who makes decisions? Who knows about this widget? Where do I go for help? Consider if there's areas of possible confusion, and then you can actually use the tension and proposal process, right? I have a tension that I don't know who makes this decision. I'm proposing it's this role, or I'm proposing that it comes here, and you kind of surface that and get clarity. And you can actually use Glassfrog as a really great tool to make the implicit explicit for those scenarios. And that's how you gain clarity of who's accountable for what. And you can use every example where there's not clarity to get clear for the next time. This one's often a bit tricky because often expectations and priorities can get lost in translation, lost in the plethora of urgent requests. Like, is it important? Is it urgent? And sometimes that gets blurry and we focus on the person that's yelling the loudest in the moment, and the important thing falls away forever. Supporting your team and just getting really clear on expectations and priorities in your strategic plan, it's just a really great way to overcome this, and revisiting it monthly, right? Like, hey, are we still doing what's important? Has anything snuck in that is kind of taken over, kind of like a disease? It's just kind of taken over this new project that, got some energy behind it, but it's not the most important thing. Maybe we should look at our priorities again. Maybe it should be important, but it's not on our list. And we did talk a lot about openness and honesty when I was chatting about psychological safety. But again, when people don't have the courage or the skills, even consider that, do the people on my team know how to speak up, to hold each other accountable? The standards start to slide, right? If people aren't asking the best of each other, then the best is not necessary or required anymore. And then we start to have lower performance because no one's saying, I don't think we're doing the best we can here. When team members don't have the courage to share their concerns or to speak up about possible obstacles, again, teams just miss opportunities, right? Like this ability to have an open and honest environment leads so much to team success. And it goes for sharing ideas as well, right? Like, imagine, so when you're sitting in a team meeting and there's a problem coming up, be looking around to see who's not sharing. And assume that somewhere in that room is an idea that's waiting to come out, and you're trying to create an environment that those ideas are coming out, and you can feel confident that people are bringing them up. And we're talking about what gets in the way so that we can identify opportunities to just continuously work to get healthier and healthier as a team. So if you're starting to feel like, oh, Tracy, it's so much, don't get too worried. Just like physical health, team health isn't best served by a crash diet and doing all the things at once. Don't start going to the gym for 4 hours a day and eating nothing. And that's not going to get you to a result, and that's not going to get you healthy, right? Making drastic changes that aren't healthy. Increasing team health is the same. It just requires small changes, right? Just step by step. Just a slight change to nutrition habits today, actually, a couple weeks from now, you're going to start to notice a difference. If I just start to eat more vegetables, I'm going to feel better. For me, I cut down on red wine. I did. Just a small choice. And it's not don't drink wine. That's not the way but just look at how much I'm putting in my glass and how many glasses I'm having per week. And that little change I made a month ago, I'm sliding off the COVID-15 scale, because it's just a little thing and it doesn't make a huge difference, but it's making a huge difference over time, right? One small thing starts to pay off. It's called exponential little bits, ELBs. That's why we talk about this. You're trying to think about what's that little bit that will pay off exponentially for your team. Maybe it's open and honesty with another team. Maybe that's the thing. You know what? We don't have this open and honest relationship with another team. Holy, if we did, that energy exchange would be magic. But right now there's this resistance and we just can't get momentum. So yeah, that lack of openness and honesty is another thing that gets in the way. Admittedly, I was not always the best at how I showed up in the conversations with Lindsay when our work crossed paths during those AO projects. Lindsay and I went back through a little PTSD as we were reliving some of this conversation when I was talking to her about this session. I was coming from a lot of demand language. I was project manager, really focused on I need this. You know, if you remember demand language from NBC yesterday, and I wasn't listening for needs. I was positioning and not listening, but still Lindsay would leave space to be challenged and she would hold me accountable. I can remember one really hard conversation. We were in the boardroom in Winnipeg and we just wanted to like throw up our hands and just scream. Like it was so frustrating. We just couldn't get through the conversation, but we stayed in the room because we both wanted to be successful in delivering to the client. So as frustrating as it was to challenge each other's ideas, and honestly, I had some work to do on how I challenged people's ideas. The one thing that you could always count on in those conversations with Lindsay was 100% openness and honesty. You can ask Lindsay how frustrating those conversations were. I think we'd be doing better at it now because we've learned a lot. But so those two things, lack of clarity and lack of openness and honesty, they go a little bit deeper. So we're going to go and dive into page 28 of your workbook. And we're going to look at some possible obstacles to team health. And as you read these statements, what I want you to do is think about it through the eyes of your team. You can make notes about like, oh, I think this, but I bet my team thinks this, which can be a very different lens. So like, what would your team say about them? And we're going to do breakouts again, just to have conversation. And we're going to do a little longer. We're going to take about 12 minutes here. Let's do 10. We'll do 10. 10 minutes here. Is that okay, Erin? Can we make it to 10? Awesome. So yeah, like that time, we'll split out. You'll do the individual on page 28. And if there's any conversation as you're kind of exploring together, but think of it from your team's perspective. I'll see you in 10 minutes. Welcome back. Welcome back. I think most of us are here. So how is that? Anyone find an ELB, an exponential little bit, a little nugget that's like, oh, actually, if I focus on this with our team, I wonder if that might like increase that energy transfer. Anyone find anything?
Not necessarily off of that, Tracy, but I was just thinking about your comment of like thinking of it how you are answering this questionnaire versus how the entire team would or other individual members on your team. And I found myself trying to do, okay, this is what I believe, but ooh, I wonder if that person would like strongly believe this or not at all believe this. And I wasn't quite sure, which I felt was very interesting. Then I tried to adjust my answer to be like, well, I wonder what the collective team would think. So I don't know, could be a good exercise with your actual team too.
Yeah. Anyone else find that? There's like a little bit of a normalizing as you're thinking through your team, the lens of your team.
Yeah, I definitely found the same thing. And I found that actually helped me sort of identify some potential gaps or perceived gaps in what might help my team succeed better.
Awesome. And how was the discussion? Was there any discussion or is it mostly just people going through questions? I'm always curious about the experience and anyone want to share if there was a dialogue that was useful?
Yeah, we kind of got sidetracked into our own little dialogue. So it was a good discussion and we might not have completed the exercise very well. But it did kind of bring up that topic of quench divergence and ants straying away from the path that was brought up yesterday, which made me think about the utility of that and how we can create a little psychological safety. So a few ants can go exploring outside of the box that we draw around. This is what we should be doing.
I love that. I love that. A+ for coming out of a discussion with something very interesting to share. D- for not doing the assignment. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to walk you all through a few models that exist for healthy teams. There's lots of them out there. There's some that have heavily influenced iQmetrix's thinking. And just like if someone's looking to improve their physical health, you know, you take all your habits, you put them all on the table. So maybe you journal for a week and be like, oh, what do I actually eat? How much do I move around, right? You'd look at all of the things, you'd put them all out there, and then you'd figure out, you know, you might notice that you're drinking 7 cans of soda a day. And you could just focus on like, oh, actually, if I just focused on that one little behavior, that would make a big difference. And like I said, for me, it was red wine. So we're going to go through some behaviors of healthy teams. And as a team lead or a team member, just be thinking about like, what's my soda? What's my little exponential little bit here? What might be the one area that could just take your team environment to a whole new level? So what we're looking at here is a word map of all of the team health models that have influenced iQmetrix over the last, I don't know, the major ones, I would say. I'm sure there's more. But we've got Patrick Lencioni. He's the author of the 5 Dysfunctions of Team and also the author of The Advantage. So he comes in on high degrees of trust, able to do conflict, commitment, accountability, results are important, and clarity. So that's Patrick Lencioni. And then we've got Project Aristotle in here. How many people have heard of Project Aristotle from Clayton? If you haven't, you are not taking enough training, and go book some training with Clayton, because if you don't know Project Aristotle, you haven't been around Clayton enough, because he talks about it all the time. This was a huge study Google did to find out why some teams outperform others. And we started actually with these 5 things of psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity, meaning, and impact. You'll see all those words in there. And you may remember a set of questions on the September survey. They were about collaborative behaviors, some extra questions in there about a shared sense of identity and purpose, equitable distribution of what people put in and what they get out, fair and inclusive decision-making, ways to see what other people are doing. Teammates are actually responding when someone's doing something helpful, they're encouraging it. When they're doing something unhelpful, they're discouraging it. Fast and fair conflict resolution, conflict comes up in that one. And that comes from evolutionary science put together in this framework called pro-social, just pulling together the most collaborative behaviors in groups. And then of course there's iQos, and it's got its health category, its health theme in that report, right? Where we're clarity and connection to strategy, results. We're with people who share our values. There's psychological safety. There's a feeling of contribution and confidence that the team is part of something bigger, right? So that's kind of like a word map of it all. But wow, that's a lot of words, right? So after going through all those models, all those words, all those different points, I'm just going to bring it into a small subset. Just like for physical health, we could really just focus on what we put in our body and how much energy we burn, right? Like it's just math equation. So let's keep it really simple here for team health. In my opinion, for a healthy team at iQmetrix, teams can focus on just this subset of behaviors and experience amazing advancements in your performance, in the amount of energy that you can exchange, in the results, what you can achieve together from wherever you are today. If your team's like, you know what, we're pretty awesome, it's amazing. There's always little friction points, little like resistance points that like could be so much better when you move through them. So first, focus on psychological safety. You heard so much of this week. And so that is like knowing your own defensiveness, knowing your self-acceptance. We talked a lot about it this morning in the panel about just safety and making sure people feel safe to talk and share their ideas. Focus on that. How do we create an environment where team members feel safe, where there's trust, and where ideas and solutions are being shared? Second, get good at difficult conversations and feedback. Part of trusting and feeling safe is that you aren't afraid to have a difficult conversation. And in order for this to happen, people need to know what others are doing. They need to know, they need to know that they're contributing, they're encouraging helpful behaviors. A lot of those words from the model are inside this open and honest. You know that people are going to say, hey, when you do that, like I can't do my work. When you show up for a meeting and you're all stressed out, it really impacts the team. Could you do something to like just regulate before you come to a meeting? When you know that your team is saying those things, you can feel that trust, and you're removing some of those blockers to the energy. Open and honest also involves fast and fair conflict resolution. If you've got a tension, get it resolved. Earlier this week, we heard about how unprocessed tensions don't go away. They just get in the way. So focusing on psychological safety, open and honest, because when team members are having these open and honest conversations and are holding each other to a standard, they're encouraging each other to keep doing what's working, right? Keep doing this, and that's going to build trust. When I can trust that you're going to tell me if I'm not doing a good job, I don't have to worry about it any other time. I worked for a radio company for a while, and it wasn't until after that I really recognized just the brilliant program they have for creating psychological safety. When I started working there, I was told to remember 3 things: work hard, ask for help, and be confident. And as my lead sat me down and he said to me, Tracy, I can promise you that you will always know if you're not performing. I promise I'll always let you know. You'll never be surprised if one day I tell you that it's not working out, because we'll have had a series of conversations along the way where I'm telling you what's not working and what to do better. So if you're not feeling confident or secure, or you're doubting your performance, it's probably because you're not working hard or you're not asking for help. They made it so simple. And it was like, oh, I don't have to worry about my job or how my performance is because we'll talk about it. He also did something else that set the stage for psychological safety and open and honest conversations. He said, Tracy, he was one of my best managers I've ever had. Tracy, my job is to make sure that this team can be successful. I get paid for this team to be successful. That's my job. So if I'm doing something that's getting in the way of your success, I'm getting in the way of the team's success. And I need you to be able to tell me when I'm holding you back. So if I'm showing up in a way that's preventing you from being your best self, you have to tell me. And he meant it. He really meant it. And I tested him on it in some really tricky conversations. And he meant it. And as a team, we got better. So those three things changed how I showed up at work. I never worried that on one week where I wasn't delivering results, we have bad weeks sometimes. I never worried that my job was on the line. It would be a part of our one-on-one conversation. He'd call me out on it. Tracy, what's going on? What's happening? Like this week is something's off for you. What's going on? And we'd talk about it. And I never hesitated to share if he showed up in a way that like set me back. You know, he said something that shut me down in a conversation. I was like, oh, you know what? When you showed up that way, I actually like withdrew. I don't know that I would want to talk in a conversation again like that. And it just opened up this conversation so that we could just pay more attention and you help each other raise that self-awareness, right? So getting good at difficult conversations, the honest conversations, is one of the most critical things I think we can do as a company, to be able to share honest feedback with a coworker directly so that that impact can be understood at a deeper level and you can explore it. And hopefully from this week, you've seen, you know, nonviolent communication, you have a tool and able to do that. Self-acceptance, you know what's coming up in yourself, and that defensiveness, you know what's happening in yourself and possibly in someone else that might get in the way, but really practicing and getting good at this open and honest environment. And finally, last but not least, is strategy. When the goals and the mission are clear, team members show up as this cohesive unit, right? So working with your team to just get really clear on what are we here to do? What does success look like? What are we trying to create together? What does it look like when we're winning, right? What value are we contributing to the company? How do we fit in to make sure that you can see progress and you can explicitly recognize goal attainment? So these are the three things: psychological safety, open and honest, and strategy. POS, turns out, not on purpose. I've talked a lot about psychological safety, and so I won't go too much more into it. It is so important. And I just want you to be thinking about kind of this little grid. This is from a book called The Fearless Organization, which is about creating psychological safety in your company. And they talk about that psychological safety is not about lowering performance standards. It's about creating an environment you can have high performance standards. Because if you are asking a lot of your team and there's low psychological safety, you can see that that's the anxiety zone, right? That's where your team members are showing up really anxious and they're not going to be showing up as their best selves. That extra effort, getting the fingerprints off the walls, that stuff's not happening, right? So just paying attention to what's expected of your team and what environment you're stewarding to support your team in meeting those expectations is part of that psychological safety equation. Remember, having an idea and not feeling safe to share it is one of the most unfulfilling experiences. Humans like to be creative, right? And having challenging work and feeling safe to go after it, very rewarding. You know, they're going to show up with more energy, and what you can do as a team becomes just so much more exponential little bits. Okay, POS, right? So, openness and honesty. As a leader and a steward of a team, just setting a tone for an open and honest environment can start with just being transparent, you know, just sharing information and trusting that your team can handle it. It can be sharing your own vulnerability, right? Being authentic, making sure that people know that you don't have all the answers, letting them know, you know, like, oh, actually, I'm not sure. Let's go get some more input. Let's go get some more advice. Let's go get some more information here. Admitting when you're being defensive. You know, that Dr. Laura Gallagher was saying she worked with someone who would be like, I'm having a physiological reaction right now. Can you imagine the tone that sets for a team when the leader is like, whoa, I'm being defensive. That's a human condition. We all have it. I'm going to make space that we can call it out. And it means setting an example that difficult conversations will happen so that team members can trust that they'll know what they need to know when they need to know it, right? They're having those conversations. When I was walking through this presentation with Lindsay, she was letting me know of a pretty incredible ritual that the delivery team started to support an open environment, an honest environment. And I was just like, whoa, that's bold. I love it. So in an effort to support this environment of openness and honesty, Lindsay and Tyler started a process of doing peer reviews. Well, no big deal, but together as an entire team in a room, right? So they pick 2 people at a time, and then they get the entire team to submit a peer review for those 2 people. And then the whole team gets together to discuss the reviews face-to-face with those people in the room. So reviews are still anonymous, but everyone gets to hear all the reviews and they talk about it. And everyone's gone through it and no one died and they're better because of it. But in starting this ritual, Lindsay mentioned that there was a really important part of it, really important part to it being successful, and that's leaders go first. Leaders need to go first. So Lindsay and Tyler were the first 2 people to go do their live round of feedback with the team. And Lindsay started by reading out the feedback that Ken gave her. Reading it out loud, here's what he said. What do you guys think about it? Opens up a conversation. What do you think? And she gave it from a let's curious and explore it, and she meant it as a safe space to talk. And that started it. So from that ritual, they have transparency. They have an environment where people are getting more used to being vulnerable. They've all been through it, right? This is like, we can do this. They're practicing difficult conversations. And it gives a format to practice for asking what you need, right? And people learn how to give constructive criticism. You get better and better at it as you're hearing other people's words and as you're practicing how someone responds to the words you say. It's like, oh, actually, that feedback I gave, they don't really know how to act on that. I'll do better next time, right? So just take a moment to consider some examples of openness and honesty in your team, right? Maybe like, what's one example of something that happened over the past week? Or can you think of an example where team members express themselves vulnerably? Maybe there's examples of like team to team where, you as a lead or 2 team members from different teams were just laying it all out there in these open and honest conversations. Maybe there's some takeaways from this week that, kind of helped you improve on those areas. Anyone have anything? Is this making sense? Anyone have any like burning thoughts that are coming up? Openness and honesty. Is this terrifying? Can you imagine doing peer reviews with your team live in a room?
Can I make just a comment about it? Because
please.
On that team, it's what I find really interesting about this kind of thing that we started is you have those things where you are kind of self-aware of like maybe I'm doing something in a way that might be overly defensive or not productive, but you might think that nobody in your head you just kind of like make it an excuse that okay nobody really notices, so you don't really correct that behavior. Having that then come up in those peer reviews really solidifies like okay, like I noticed this about myself and other people are noticing it too. Okay, now I need this is the time now to take action on that. So like those sessions are actually I find really helpful.
Thank you. Everyone else going to do some live peer reviews in their teams? Pretty amazing. All right, POS. There'll be a test later. Strategy. I'm just kidding, there's no test. Strategy. What we know about healthy teams is that they know what they're set out to do. We're seeing as teams are getting better and better at having their own strategic practice where they're sitting down and reviewing their plan and reviewing their metrics. When team members know what their plan is, when they know what success looks like, and they know how they fit into the bigger plan, and they know how to raise tensions about the strategy, when they have this environment, they are more engaged, more effective, they're having a better time, and they know what winning is supposed to feel like, so they're motivated to get towards it. So when you talk to Lindsay's team, they have very clear goals, they know what the next milestone is, and they're all showing up to move forward to hit those goals. They know what success looks like. They talk about the goals together. They celebrate their successes together. They know how their work fits in. And they have these rhythms and rituals that allow them to raise tensions, right? So psychological safety, openness and honesty, and strategy. If you remember nothing else, that's all we need. So, okay, how do you know how your team is doing? The first place you can look is at the iQos data. You can look for trends on how your team is doing against the company average. You can pay attention to how many members of your team are responding. Perhaps you're missing some voices. what information isn't in that data is just as important as what information is in that data. And that's a really great place to start. But actually, really, the very best way to figure out how your team health is to ask your team, right? Is to bring it up like, hey, I just came out of Leeds, I want to book 2 hours, this Friday afternoon, and I want to talk about how we're doing. IQU has some assessments if you want support and like how to help that. You can make an anonymous form and send that out. I almost said Google form, and then I saw Shannon's face and I was like, Microsoft form. You can make an anonymous form and send that out to the teams. Like, there's ways that you can get this anonymous feedback. You could also just start doing something where it's like, actually, I want to be honest. I want us to be able to have these conversations, and we don't have to be anonymous because we're all here to do the best thing. So really, if you want to know how your team is doing, ask them. After this session, you'll find a link in the events, the Slack channel. I did a little interview with Rhonda from CX, where I asked Rhonda to share what the CX team has done to build this culture of open and honest conversations, and what they're doing to create psychological safety, what their journey has been like as they're figuring out, how do we dig into this data? How do we create an open environment where people are talking, where we're continuously improving? So be sure to watch that. It's short. I think it's like 8 minutes or something, but be sure to watch that and just consider what your team can be doing to kind of on a regular basis, keep assessing your overall team health. How are we doing? And if you don't have the data, so maybe the iQos report card doesn't break it down in the way that you need, there's nothing stopping you from collecting it. You can bring a coach in as a team lead. If you wanted to have a coach come in and just gather data for you as a team lead and then sort through it. There's so many ways to get the data. Don't let it stop you from figuring out, how's our team actually doing? If you don't know where you are, it's hard to go anywhere else. So it all works together. When there is psychological safety, there's openness and honesty, right? When there's openness and honesty, concerns are getting shared, ideas are shared, people hold each other to a standard, and there's a true environment of learning and evolving and getting better. And strategy is the map that tells the team where they're headed, how they know they're getting there, and what to focus on. I asked Lindsay what her and her team are working on right now, and I was really hoping she was working on something. Otherwise, this whole thing wouldn't. I'm like, Lindsay, tell me what you're working on right now, because that team is always working on something, or that's been my experience. And so when I asked her, she said, honestly, right now, it's like this cohesion. Our team is used to like the chemistry from being physically in the same place, and people, you know, they're showing up for work and the work is getting done, but it's just feeling less engaged, that energy just isn't there. So as a team, they're working hard to try to figure out how to do that in such strange times. So they do Friday time together where they might do a show and tell, and someone will wander around their house and like show different things, but they're actively working on that one thing. So, and just a note that, by the way, it's actually expected that you're not doing it all perfectly. It's actually expected that you're making mistakes, that there's going to be things that you can do better, things that you did better yesterday that you didn't do today because you haven't quite developed a habit of showing up that way consistently. It's not a straight path. The leadership journey is not a step-by-step forward. It's never ending. So expect that at some point you're probably going to do something or say something that you're going to learn from that might erode psychological safety, that you need to come back to the team and talk openly about, vulnerably about, and that creates more openness and honesty and more psychological safety by just being like, oh, you know what I did right there? That, like, I didn't mean to shut you down. I actually really want to hear your idea. Like, can we just like hold the space here and talk about that? So, but like any progress, right? It starts with just that first step, you know, watch your wine, Tracy. A little tweak, an examination or an exploration of what those steps might be, what might mean that can help make your team just get that much better. So I would like to just take time. How are we doing for time here? Our last breakout, yeah. So what we'll do for time, we'll take about 8 minutes. And I just want you guys to get into a group and just talk about your week, what you pulled out of it. You know, these methods of the psychological safety, openness and honesty, strategy. What are some action steps that you're like, actually, I want to like focus on this. So we're going to break out into groups here. Let's see, we're at 2:14. Let's take 8 minutes. That works. And then just talk about like, what's an exponential little bit that you gathered from this week? What's that one thing that if you focused on your can of soda, your wine, whatever you want, metaphor you want to use, what is that one thing that if you focused on that, it would just have an exponential impact? And what's the next step? What's the next step you'll take in your leadership journey? And there's pages in the very back of your workbook too, if you wanted to make notes there. So let's head out into some breakouts. 8 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. So you had no homework to do that time around. How are the discussions? Anyone have a share?
We had an interesting perspective going on because like my team just had a couple of changes in terms of personnel, and then Garrett's team is merging with another team. So we had an interesting discussion about that and what that means for team health and team building and kind of rebuild or finding that new team dynamic once you have that changeover.
Yeah.
It's certainly nice timing though, having all of these sessions and having all these ideas as you're instating those kind of new team practices anyways though. Being the Garrett of said team.
I meant the other Garrett, but
oh, well, on the plus side. Now when you say Garrett, you know it's the same team.
We're talking
There you
about
go.
Garrett S, right?
Yep.
Yeah, Garrett.
So,
S.
What else happened in those breakouts?
I think Miles and I had a lot of notes to compare. We're both leads of very reactive teams. And one of the things I was reflecting on is it's really hard to kind of just take a step back. Like the joke that I made in our breakout room is that like, so just even thinking about our team purpose is not to complain about cricket bridges, you know, for as much as we do that, right? But it's very easy, you know, I think as time goes on though, it's very easy for that to almost become the purpose, even though we're all aligned, even though we're all together. And I'm sure that if we sat down and actually said like, this is what, you know, this is what incident management does. This is what we do. I would be really interested to hear like them vocalize what they feel our team purpose is, right? And even if we all agree and we come out of there thinking like, yeah, no problem, we know it. I think saying it out loud again would go a long way, just as a first step, like just to, you know, to reset ourselves a little bit.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I just want to hold space for a moment to just like celebrate the effort that was put in this week. You know, gathering those ideas, putting together those thoughts and next actions. Know that if you are wondering or you are stuck, shameless plug for the coaching team in IQU. We're there to support you in your journey. And so you can reach out with anything of just like, I just got to leads. I don't know what to do. So yeah.